Ever since she was a little girl, Rosa had dreamed of the day she would get married. She imagined herself in a beautiful white long dress, a delicate veil, and, of course, elegant white shoes with slender heels. Her hair would be styled in soft curls, adorned with tiny white roses. Now, at 25, Rita gazed at her fiancé, her heart pounding with joy. He had given her the wedding of her dreams. Raised in a family where frugality was the norm, she was used to hearing that money should be spent wisely, on education and essentials, not on luxuries or fleeting pleasures. "It's too expensive," was the phrase little Rosa heard most often from her mother. "Mom, I don't want a black jacket, can we buy a beige one?" she had pleaded at the age of 12. "No, dear, it's impractical and will get dirty quickly. You'll need to wear it for at least 2 years, her mother had responded firmly. "I'll have outgrown it by next year," Rosa protested, hoping her mother would relent. "We'll buy a size larger, so it lasts longer," her mother declared, pointing to the black jacket that Rosa disliked but would be forced to wear for the next 2 years. When her father saw other people's lavish weddings, he would shake his head and mutter about the foolishness of spending money on such extravagance. A home was more important, he insisted, and if you had a home, then you should be thinking about improving. Rosa's dreams of her own wedding seemed destined to remain just that, dreams. She never imagined that someone like Michael would come into her life and fulfill her deepest wishes. A beautiful wedding ceremony, a stunning dress, a grand reception, and a honeymoon in the Maldives. Michael had promised her all of this. Rosa looked at Michael, hardly able to believe her happiness. Her parents were happy for her, too, but they couldn't understand how anyone could spend so much money so freely on what they saw as momentary pleasures. Michael's mother, Juana, watched the beautiful bride with love. Sadly, Juana was Michael's only remaining relative, though she had once mentioned a sister living in another city. Rosa and Juana had developed a wonderful relationship, which was no surprise since it was Juana who had introduced Rosa to her son. Juana, a well-groomed and charming woman, worked at a grocery, where Rosa delivered fresh goods from the city's most famous bakery. Michael was a senior manager at a mobile phone store. Rosa had never chased after wealth. Despite her romantic dreams, she always knew her husband would likely be a simple man. And that's exactly what Michael was, modest in dress, unassuming in appearance, and of average height. Though he was 30 years old, he looked much younger. He treated Rosa with great care and helped his mother as well. Juana drove an elegant little car, and it was clear she frequented beauty salons. Rosa fell more in love with Michael each day, amazed by how he continually surprised her. One time, they were invited to a friend's gathering. After dinner, one of the guests suggested playing a game where you had to imitate a famous person for everyone to guess. The names included Charlie Chaplin, Mike Tyson, Trump, Michael Jackson, and other well-known figures. It was a lot of fun. But whenever it was Michael's turn, everyone was in stitches. Using whatever props were at hand, he would craft a mustache, a hat, or create the illusion of a missing tooth. He never repeated himself. Their friends were in awe of Michael's talents, which seemed so out of place for someone so unremarkable at first glance. After the wedding, Michael and Rosa moved into the apartment that Rosa had inherited from her grandmother. they planned to buy a place of their own. Life felt like a fairy tale, except for one thing: Rosa couldn't get pregnant. After 3 years, a miracle finally happened. She missed her period, had an ultrasound, and that evening she shared the wonderful news with Michael and Juana. Juana was deeply touched and gifted her daughter-in-law a stunning emerald ring. Michael acted like a child, laughing, spinning his beloved around in his arms. But Rosa's physical condition was far from ideal. From the very beginning of her pregnancy, she was plagued by severe morning sickness. And then Juana shocked her with terrible news. She had cancer and was moving to another city where her sister lived. She would undergo a long, grueling treatment and didn't want to burden the young couple. Rosa was desperate, telling her mother-in-law that they would take care of her, that they would help with everything. Why did she have to leave? But one morning, Juana left the city. Michael's reaction to his mother's departure was strange. He loved her so much, yet he seemed so calm about her illness. Why had he let her go alone? Rosa wondered. He had been distant lately, speaking to her tenderly but with a sense of detachment. Rosa also noticed that Michael didn't go to work every day. Yet they still had money. One evening, he brought home a small safe and gave Rosa the key. Inside were stacks of cash. "This is for our new home. But if you need anything, you can take it from here," Michael said. Something in his eyes stopped Rosa from asking too many questions. Where had he gotten that money? Everything about it seemed strange. Rosa decided that night she would have a serious talk with her husband. They also needed to figure out what to do about Juana. It was wrong to leave her alone in a strange city, dealing with her illness by herself. That evening, Michael called Rosa and told her he wouldn't be coming home that night. When she asked what had happened, he didn't answer. Rosa was beside herself with worry, her heart filled with dread. The next day, Michael was unreachable. He didn't come home, and his phone was off. Rosa called everywhere she could think of. Only then did she realize that Michael had never introduced her to any of his friends. He had never even mentioned anyone. She only knew his mother. But she couldn't call Juana and worry her. The woman would go mad with fear for her son if she found out he was missing. On the third day, Rosa went to the police. The officers gave her strange looks when she couldn't name a single friend or acquaintance of her husband. She told them where he worked, but there were many mobile phone stores in the city. She didn't know which one Michael managed. A week later, she contacted Juana. Juana didn't answer right away. When she finally did, she said she knew nothing about her son. "Rosa, Michael will turn up. Don't worry. But please don't contact me. I'm undergoing very serious therapy," Juana said over the phone. All of this was very strange. Rosa knew Juana was seriously ill and had her own problems, but the way she was so indifferent to her son's disappearance troubled her. She remembered how little concern Michael had shown over his mother's diagnosis. On top of her fears, Rosa was suffering from the severe nausea of her pregnancy. Despite feeling awful, she decided to visit Juana's apartment, where Michael had lived before they got married. Rosa knocked on the door, and a friendly woman answered almost immediately, looking curiously at the pale, anxious visitor. When Rosa asked if she knew anything about the previous tenants, the woman nodded. Yes, they were my parents. They've been renting this apartment out for a long time. The last tenants lived here for several years. When they moved out, I moved in, the woman said. Rosa slowly descended the stairs, her mind in a fog. She couldn't piece together the strange facts she had encountered. Juana was in grave trouble, and it seemed wrong to disturb her. But they would have to talk seriously about what was going on. However, when Rosa tried to call her again, Juana's number was no longer in service. What was happening? Rosa wondered. She opened the safe that Michael had left behind, hoping it might hold some clue. But all she found was more cash, some old keys, and a flash drive. Michael and Juana had disappeared, and Rosa couldn't contact them. A year later, Michael was officially declared missing. Rosa's parents were convinced that Michael's free spending wasn't without reason. Maybe he had won a large sum in a card game and was killed for it. Rosa was bombarded with humiliating speculations from friends and family. Heartbroken, she didn't want to hear any of it and began to shut down such conversations. Rosa gave birth to a son. Gradually, she learned to live without her husband, but she never stopped waiting for his call. She used the money Michael had left behind, as having a child brought new expenses. She named her son Donald. He was a remarkably bright, cheerful, and strong boy. He walked early, talked early, and Rosa delighted in raising him. Wherever they went, people marveled at Donald's abilities. By the age of 4, Donald was reading well. On the advice of a teacher, Rosa enrolled him in French and Spanish lessons. He progressed so quickly that a year later, Rosa added Chinese and German to his studies. Donald excelled in everything he tried, effortlessly. Rosa saw familiar traits in her son and remembered how Michael had boasted that he, too, had a gift for languages. When Donald started school, he did so well that his teacher suggested applying to a prestigious lyceum. Getting in was tough. There was intense competition. Even paying for a spot didn't guarantee admission. One day, the director of the lyceum summoned Rosa and told her that students from their institution were being selected for specialized individual training in certain fields. From here, they selected future intelligence officers, diplomats, actors, and even astronauts. They were identified, mentored, and trained. The school interacted with the parents, giving them recommendations on how to guide their child toward a specific path. "I would be delighted if Donald had a happy future," Rosa replied with a smile, though she didn't fully understand the purpose of this conversation. We, too, are always pleased for our graduates. But that's not the point. If only you knew how many children lost their chance in life because of simple teenage problems, the director began to explain. "I'm not sure I understand you." "It seems like Donald doesn't have any problems," Rosa replied, somewhat confused. "Don't worry, Rosa. There really aren't any problems. Just make sure there never are. Great opportunities can be lost if a teenager gets involved in a fight and ends up with a police record. Petty thefts that might not affect an ordinary child's future can ruin the promising career of a talented student," the director explained. Rosa understood what he was trying to say. She remembered how her cousin was denied a job in the police force because of some minor youthful misconduct. She was confident she could handle it. After all, Donald had never caused her any trouble. And so it was. The boy was one of the best students at the Lyceum. He was already 10 years old. Much time had passed. Rita thought of Michael less and less often, but sometimes in her son's eyes, his walk, and his gestures, she saw the man she had loved with all her heart many years ago. Rosa had an account on a popular social network, but while she was married to Michael, she never logged in. Sometimes she wanted to post photos of them together, but her husband had asked her not to. However, lately, she had been feeling intensely lonely, so she spent more time on social media, watching videos and seeing what interesting things were happening in her friends' lives. One day, she received a strange private message from a woman named Taylor. Judging by the photos, Taylor lived in another city. She wrote a phone number and asked Rosa to contact her as soon as possible. Rosa wasn't sure if she wanted to communicate with a stranger, so she decided to carefully review Taylor's page. Some photos showed children, a boy and a girl about 5 or 7 years old. And in one of the pictures, Taylor was embracing a man. My God! Rosa's heart began to beat faster. In Taylor's companion, she recognized Michael, her husband who had disappeared 10 years ago. Could she be mistaken? Rosa zoomed in on the photo. No, there could be no mistake. Michael looked slightly different, but it was definitely him. In other photos, he was shown in profile or from behind, but it was still clear that the children on Taylor's page were his family. With trembling hands, Rosa dialed the number. Hello, I'm the wife of your husband. Our husband is a murderer and a fraud, Taylor said without a greeting as she answered on the first ring. Rosa recalled the conversation with this strange woman as if in a fog. For most of the conversation, Rosa listened without knowing what to say. Taylor told her that she had been married to Brad for 7 years. They had dated for 2 years before that. Rosa said that her husband's name was not Brad. That wasn't surprising, Taylor replied. He used fake documents. Taylor had long suspected that her generous, charming husband, who had no friends, was not actually the hardware store consultant he claimed to be. They always had money. It was strange that Brad didn't have a social media profile and didn't allow her to have one either. But Taylor didn't listen to him. She wanted to share her happiness with her friends. At the beginning of their life together, Taylor saw a wedding photo on the page of her sister's former colleague. The groom was her Brad. The sister had been a guest at that wedding. When Taylor showed the photo to Rosa, she recognized her acquaintance, who had indeed been at her wedding. Rosa's husband had forbidden her to post photos, but no one could stop friends from sharing pictures. I asked Brad then if he had been married. He said no. I loved him so much that I believed him, Taylor said sadly. And yet, sometimes Brad's behavior seemed strange. Mutual acquaintances saw him in odd places, in unusual disguises. He denied everything, and was otherwise the perfect family man. Then one day, he disappeared. A week later, the police came to Taylor. Her husband was accused of several criminal acts, including contract killings. She didn't want to believe it, but by then, she had too many suspicions. And now Brad had been gone for several months. He was on the run. It turned out that he had used fake documents. So my marriage to Brad is a sham. After all, There is no Brad Stinger, the woman sighed. After her husband disappeared, Taylor contacted that same acquaintance who told her a sad story about Rosa, whose husband had disappeared without a trace. That's when Taylor understood a lot. Brad, aka Michael, was a criminal. He had vanished, which meant he would soon find a new victim and start a family with her. Why did he do all this? Rosa whispered. She couldn't believe that Michael was involved in crime and worked for the mafia. And to cynically start a second family, leaving the first. No, it couldn't be true. Rosa, he needed a cover, so he wouldn't arouse suspicion. Michael, aka Brad, had been carrying out contract killings for years, and he used us as a cover. Who would suspect such a wonderful guy, a loyal family man? Taylor explained. The women talked for hours. As much as Rosa wanted to believe in her illusions, she realized that Taylor was telling the truth. Everything fit, even the way Michael skillfully transformed into other characters during the game. I understand, Taylor, but what do you want from me? Rosa asked cautiously. Help bring this scoundrel to justice. Before he ruins the lives of many more women, Taylor replied directly. The woman said that the police might need any information she had, documents, electronic devices. And they would also need to find Juana. Brad had never introduced Taylor to his mother, but he said she was alive. She didn't have cancer, I'm sure. And she definitely knows what her son is up to. Through her, the police will find Brad, Taylor insisted. She had to convince Rosa to help track down and expose this criminal. Rosa thought for a moment. The flash drive was still with her. Once, she had tried to check it, but it required a password to open. Rosa promised to think about it. On one hand, she felt some relief. Michael was alive. There was at least some clue to the mystery that had tormented her for years. And yet, there were even more mysteries now. The woman's head began to ache as she feverishly considered what to do. Of course, they needed to find the scoundrel and bring him to justice. But then her gaze fell on a photo of her son. If everything came out, Donald would have a criminal for a father. Could she testify against the father of her child and her former husband? Though, for all these years, the father had never shown any concern for them. Not once had he tried to contact. Rosa couldn't sleep that night. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She tossed and turned in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the truth that had suddenly unraveled before her. Michael, her Michael, was a criminal. A murderer. A fraud. How could it be? How could the man she had loved so deeply, the father of her child, be the same man who had deceived so many, ruined lives, and vanished without a trace? It felt like she had been living in a nightmare, but the sharp edge of reality cut deeper than any dream ever could. The next morning, with bags under her eyes and a heart heavy with despair, Rosa went about her usual routine, but everything felt surreal. She watched Donald eat his breakfast, the innocent boy oblivious to the storm brewing in his mother's soul. How could she protect him from the truth? How could she preserve the beautiful image of his father that she had worked so hard to maintain? She thought back to the flash drive, the one piece of evidence she had, the one connection to Michael's hidden life. It was locked away in her drawer, like a Pandora's box that, once opened, could unleash a flood of truths she wasn't sure she could handle. But she knew she had to do something. The decision weighed heavily on her. Should she help Taylor and the police bring Michael to justice? Or should she protect her son from the stigma that would surely follow? Days passed, and Rosa continued to agonize over her decision. Taylor had called several times, her voice urgent, pleading for Rosa to act. But Rosa couldn't shake the image of her son, his future, his happiness, crumbling if the world knew the truth about his father. Finally, one evening, Rosa sat down at her kitchen table, the flash drive and the old key in front of her. After all, they could be evidence. She stared at it for what felt like hours, her mind racing through all the possibilities. She knew she had to make a choice. Once again, she thought about her son. With a determined gesture, she threw the flash drive and keys into the trash bin. If her testimony was needed, they would find her anyway. How she would behave at the police station, she didn't know. But one thing she understood for sure: she couldn't save the world, but she was obligated to fight for her son's future.